Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. Oops, I think another season of the Collectors Podcast. Now, this is season two, a new year, and we are here again with episode one. And you'll not believe that today I have a very special guest with me. Well, obviously, we have all the time really good guests, but this one is really special. Her name is Dr. Rebecca Ruth Gould. She's a writer, translator, professor at University of Birmingham. A Pushcart Prize nominee, she was awarded the Creative Writing New Zealand Flash Fiction Competition Prize in 2019. Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming to our show. So, Rebecca, I just read your Wikipedia page. I did some research, and you have done an awesome and wide variety of incredible work. Now, from writing an award winning monograph, Writers and Rebels, to your work on the theory of racism, which has been the most satisfying work you have done, and in what way?
Well, it's a really interesting and difficult question. I would say my first thought is that uh, I've worked in many different things, many different types of writing, and it's almost like asking to prefer one over the other is like asking which child do you prefer. So my
Yeah.
my writing, I think of these, and I mean, as kinds of different children or different aspects of myself. So I would say, I wouldn't really want to say, oh, one is more satisfying or better than the other. They all have their frustrations and their joys. But I would say they represent a different part of me. So, for example, the my book on the Caucasus, it's an important part of me, not the only part, but I tend to think of myself. I really was transformed by the time I spent in Tbilisi and the North Caucasus region from 2004 to six. It really changed my life. I mean, it set me in a different path and it opened my eyes. I was a undergraduate major in Russian, and it just expanded my horizons. And I tend to think that I managed to present a story there that basically no one else could tell, because this isn't a
Okay.
very well-known part of the world, and I saw things that I felt perhaps no one else had seen, or very few people had seen. So in the sense of perhaps a contribution to scholarship, I'm proud of that, and I think I hope it will be a really lasting work, because most books about that subject are written from very Russian perspectives, and they don't think about all the hundreds, I mean, different indigenous peoples, hundreds of different languages and cultures that are there, and are very ancient, and so those are often ignored. So I hope to kind of open a window in that way. But then there's other aspects of myself too. Like my fiction, obviously, it's another
Yes.
part of me.
Yeah.
My poetry translation's another part of me. So I guess it's just I could never, choose. Just like children, I'm not going to choose one of my children over the other.
Yes, so you are a versatile writer. You pick up whatever you like and
Right.
you start
And I
writing.
think it beats, I mean, that being able to have that freedom, it helps me love what I do, because if I could
Yes.
only write in one subject and I could only focus on one thing, that would be kind of boring. So the fact that I
Yeah.
have the freedom to go back and forth is rewarding.
Yes. I can understand because I was working full time as an IT engineer and I
Hmm.
left my job last year. In
Wow.
2019, I started this. And I think it
Exciting.
gives you a lot of freedom. Plus, you have so much liberty to learn whatever you want and write about it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the other thing I was going to say. I mean, I think in a sense more important than looking back on one's achievements, it's more that you have a few that I think for any creator or any writer, being able to look forward and thinking this is the process, being focused on the moment in which what is creating. And so I try to, I hope with my writing, it's not so much, oh, I did this wonderful thing and now I'm happy. It's more like I want to continue to, that's what I'm doing in the
Yes.
present is the most important.
Yes, I think it's everlasting. Another thing is that I read that you won a prize for your, I think it's a flash fiction, Watching Chekhov in Tehran, that
Hmm.
won a runner up for the Beachmore Arts Journalism Competition in London. Would you like to give a gist to our
Sure.
audience about it?
Sure. Yeah, so that's actually nonfiction. I do write
Nonfiction.
fiction, but that did happen. It's just a sort of episode that I witnessed in when I was in Iran, and I specialize as well as the Caucasus. After, by the way, after I lived in Tbilisi in Georgia and the Caucasus region for 2004 to six, I got my PhD, went to Columbia University, but then I went back and forth to Iran several times, and I've lived there as much as I can within the limits of being a U.S. citizen, which means that there have been limits, obviously, in terms of how long I could stay. But the last time I was there was 2016, and it was a really, each time I go to Iran, I've always been just blown away by the vibrancy of the culture, and I mean the incredibly, how educated people are just about the world. They really know what's going on, and not just in Iran, but I mean, they have a very global perspective, at least the Iranians I tend to meet, and just very fascinating conversationalist and very, very well read. I mean, literature in translation is so well known in Iran compared to, they make Americans look very provincial. And since my background is in, my early, like when I was in my 20s, I began sort of scholarship by studying Russian literature. I'm not a specialist now in Russian, but that was my beginning. So I love Chekhov, and I'm familiar with Chekhov. And so it's just incredible to see that, Chekhov was being performed in Tehran right when I was there. And Uncle Vanya. So there was this play, Uncle Vanya, that was being performed, and it was really resonating with the Iranian audience. And so I think that's not an accident. The reason why it resonated is because it's about this man, Vanya, his name is Vanya, and he's I suppose in his probably 30s, and he's sort of, he's never managed to get a job. He's an intellectual who sort of lives in a society that can't nurture his ambitions, because it's not suited for people like him, and there just isn't the kind of work that he wants, and so he kind of sits around in bed all day and complains. And I think many Iranians are struggling, in this kind of social environment where there's no work. They're incredibly educated. I mean, as a demographic, like so many, I think I probably, the number of Iranians who have even PhDs and BAs is much higher than in the US, for example, but their incomes are much, much lower because there's no jobs for them. And so this, so I think this idea of the kind of, there's a trope in Russian literature called the superfluous man. So someone who can't find himself, he's superfluous to society. He doesn't have a function, and yet he wants to make the world a better place, but there's no role for him. So this is what this play is about. It's a wonderful play, and I really recommend it. And I watched it in Tehran, and it was also, so I was both interested in the play, and I was interested in the Iranian reaction to it, and I was interested in the revision to the play that happened by this Iranian playwright. His name is Amir Kohistani. So he, in the play, in the Chekhov's play, there's a woman who is she kind of follows Sasha. Her name is Sasha. She's in love with Vanya. She wants to marry him, and she's very passive. She's kind of the stereotypical loyal bride, I suppose you could say. And so she follows him everywhere. She dreams about him. She's a appealing figure, but she's very weak in the Russian version. And so in the Persian version, which is the contemporary, the one that I saw performed in 2016, she leaves him. And so she becomes the one who sort of drives the events of the play. And, she gets fed up with his sort of what's the word? Self-pity, I suppose. And they're both sympathetic characters, but so that was very interesting to see that reversal. And I had a chance to meet the playwright as well. He was at the performance that I attended, and it was thousands of people were there. It was huge. And he said, he was thinking of the Green Revolution in Iran when he rewrote that. He was thinking of the role that Iranian women played, and the Green Revolution is from 2009, when there was kind of chaos, and people were sort of like, even more violent than the coup that just happened in the United States. The election results were contested, so it appears that most people did not vote for Ahmadinejad, but the Iranian state decided to install him as the president, and people were just outraged, right? Because he was not popular. The government was paying lip service to democracy, and they wanted to have their votes count. So there was lots of violence in the streets, and women really played a role. Young women, especially students, they confronted the police, who were armed, and many of them died in large numbers. And so the Iranian playwright Amir Kohistani said that he wanted, with his Uncle Vanya, with the revision of it, the Iranian version of it, he wanted to pay tribute to the strength of the women that he witnessed during those protests. So it was, so many, there's so many layers of history and culture that were happening in that play. And so I was just fascinated in just recording that. And of course, that was a very short piece that I published, but actually I have a longer essay coming out. It's
Okay.
a more extended, really analysis of the text, of the differences between the different versions coming out. It's an academic comparative drama, but I'm trying not to make it too academic. Just it gives me a chance to go a bit deeper in terms of what actually happens in the plays.
Yes. So, just one thing you told about Iran, that there are people who are really well read and academic, but
Right.
don't get the opportunity.
That's
So,
right.
is it related to their political or the government system that they don't get? Because if you are very academic, you look out for a good opportunity plus good monetary things. But if you don't get it, then yeah, that happens
Sure.
in India too.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think the bureaucracy of Iranian universities is not set up to support independent thinkers, and so everyone who wants to be hired has to pass this kind of test to make sure
Got
that they have the right belief systems. That they pray the right
it.
times, and it's not even. I don't really even think it's about religion so much as that they have to show that they're obedient. That they're not going to criticize, and so if being intellectual is almost by definition being critical, right? If you're not going to criticize the government, it's hard to be honest as an intellectual. And so I think so that the result of that is that there isn't really work, yeah, for many Iranians, and even for someone with a BA, just to get a job, say delivering trash, cleaning trash or something like that, that would be good. They would be lucky.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it's a
Okay.
very difficult situation.
Yes, yes, I can understand. Another thing is that you are an American. Correct me if I'm wrong
That's right. That's
about the
true. I am.
information.
Yeah. Good guess.
You did your BA from University of California,
That's
Berkeley.
right.
Did your PhD from Columbia University.
Right.
And then you moved to the UK. And
Right.
then you are a professor of Islamic Studies
That's
and
correct.
Comparative
Right.
Literature, right?
Right.
So now I have few questions. The first is, how did this happen? What aroused your interest in this field? And what do you think about the perspectives which has changed your worldview, considering we are in so much divided times?
Sure. So I guess I would say I grew up, yes, in the United States, both on the in the California area and mostly California area actually. So a little bit in Florida when I was very young, New Orleans, and my family moved around quite a bit. But my most sort of memory of the Americas isn't so positive. I mean, it was a very homogenous society that I grew up in. I didn't like that at all. I was very
Okay.
interested in the world, and I wish I had been exposed to more languages and cultures growing up. But the first chance I got was I actually did very bad in high school, precisely because I was very just such a homogenous. I wasn't learning anything, and so I was very lucky that in California they allowed. I hope they still do. They allow people to take a test that will enable them to enter university at the community college at the age of 16. So I did that, and then I transferred to Berkeley, which was really, yeah, another transformative moment, because I was just, for once, people were reading books because they loved them, because they believed in the power of books to change the world. And I ended up at that point I was in love with Dostoevsky, so I majored in Russian. But at that time, this was when the Chechen War
Okay.
was really in the headlines. And so my background, I mean, I would say, literature is my first love. It wasn't so much I was thinking, I have to study this country or this country or this country, but I was just interested in literature, and Dostoevsky is a pretty compelling author, right? And so I thought, okay, if I really want to enjoy Dostoevsky, I have to learn Russian. But yes, because the Russian, thinking about Russia at that time was happening with reference to Chechnya, I became very interested in that and understanding why are the Chechens trying to secede? What's going on? And I felt that, as I had really wonderful teachers who were really experts on Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and so forth, but they weren't really able to offer any kind of satisfying account or analysis of why some Muslim people. First of all, why are the Muslims in Russia in the first place? Like this is just a
Yes.
blank spot in their in the sort of Russian scholarship. So I felt, okay, I have to educate myself, and so I waited till after I graduated in 2004, I think, maybe 2003 was my first trip to the Caucasus. I just did it on my own because there wasn't a and it was considered dangerous, to go to that
Okay.
region. It was a war zone, really. So I didn't
Yes.
wasn't going to get a scholarship for it. I ended up going to so I sort of did a circuitous. I think I took a train from Moscow which is very far, to Chechnya, and I was in a refugee camp for a couple of days with the Chechen family, and they took me into Chechnya, which at that time, so it was a war zone. It was just like bombed to the ground. I could not legally have gone in, so I had sort of wear a hijab and basically hide in the car. But I really saw, it made me realize, okay, this is another perspective on Russian literature that I just had not, or just on Russia, that was just so important. All of these people having this very complex, rich history, but that was being destroyed and in front of my eyes. And it didn't form part of my education. And I thought, well, oh my God, like this, I need to write about this. There's a lot to be said, and no one's writing about it. So then I did get a scholarship to go back and live in that region for 2 years.
Okay.
And to study Chechen, which is it's its own language. It's not related to, it's a language of the mountains. So people have, very, very difficult to understand, very complex. And I ended up actually learning Georgian, which is related to Chechen in some ways. But then, my kind of goal was just to get a better understanding of this very complex part of the world. And especially to understand the literature, the culture, which are thousands of years old, which go back, it's ages. And also, but then there was another sort of layer of to my scholarship that happened when I was living in Tbilisi, which was that in addition to sort of being broadly interested in the Muslim culture of the region, Tbilisi itself was under Persian rule for hundreds and hundreds of years before they were part of the Russian Empire. And so there were all these traces of Persian culture that became fascinating to me. So there's this first book project of the Caucasus that I was working on at the time, doing field work. It's more of an anthropology, you could say. But then I also became interested in Persian and more the classical, the pre-modern legacies that were also in a way kind of badly understood. The legacy of Persia in Georgia was not really appreciated at the time. So I thought, okay, I want to work on this, but I had to go back to my PhD. So that's when I went to Columbia. I ended up doing my PhD in classical Persian literature, which is actually very different from my first book as a subject. So that was at Columbia. And then, so when I graduated, got my PhD, obviously it was, I had so many different interests and I didn't really fit into a slot. And I found that the UK system, and I didn't go directly to the UK as for my job. I went to to Singapore. I taught there for, I think, 2 years. So I sort of traveled a lot. I've also lived in Palestine in between that time, in between the UK and getting my PhD. So but the short answer to make a long story short, I think that the reason that drew me to the UK was simply because there was more opportunity in terms of my research. There's perhaps more flexibility in terms of what I was working on, and I've just found more freedom. I found that research in general is better supported by the government, by the state, by the EU, even after Brexit, hopefully. So there are very practical reasons. But I do like living, I think of it as Europe, even though some people in Britain might not. But for me, I do feel it's sort of more, it's closer to my areas of research. It's a better fit for me.
It's a better fit.
So long answer. Sorry.
No, completely. It's wonderful listening to your stories and the fascinating stories. Plus, you have done so much work. I think it's incredible. And I think you are making your life really meaningful. That is what is important. Okay. I read another thing about you, that you are maintaining a list of what you are reading. And I think it's wonderful. I do that too, but I am not putting it. I decided that after I saw your thing, it's very interesting to have all your books noted down. So which is the one book that has changed your life, and which are the books you try to read or maybe reread quite often?
Right. So obviously it's a difficult question, naming one book, but I would probably say Walter Benjamin's Illuminations. This is a collection of essays that were gathered after his death by Hannah Arendt, who is a political philosopher that knew him. I think what Walter Benjamin, so he was a German Jewish essayist, I would say is his primary genre of writing. He's a writer. He actually tried to be a scholar. He finished a PhD, but he was not. The PhD was not approved, and so and this was happening right before the Nazi rise to power. So he had to leave Germany instead of making a career.
Got it.
And so he made a living just as a writer, traveling until his very tragic death. And which is right when the Germans were invading Spain, where he was based. But what about him appeals to me? It's the way that he sort of managed to link the books that he read and his insights to his everyday life, and really he kind of crafted his own literary genres. Even though he wrote in essays, but he didn't try to fit. I mean, well, when he did try to fit into a pigeonhole, he failed, unfortunately. But he just pioneered. He had these sort of the Arcades project, which is where he just gathered to. Actually, I think Collector, the name of your journal, is a very good fit for his own aesthetic. He whatever he saw in his wanderings throughout Paris, for example, he would just collect it into a notebook and reflect on it. He didn't necessarily try to impose coherence onto his ideas when they didn't yield like a lesson or a moral. He just put the fragments of his experience together. And I think that's a really admirable, it's a really kind of brave way of writing, because we feel, academics especially, we feel the pressure to kind of extract some kind of lesson from what we see and what we learn. But unfortunately, a lot of what happens in this earth doesn't have any lesson. It doesn't have any
exactly. That's what our aim of a publication also, whenever we conducted writing challenges also in last year, 3 writing challenges, and we thought that we will have stories which will portray some lesson. But there are many stories which are very interesting and they don't have a lesson. But you like reading them, right?
Exactly. Because they feel true. They feel real.
They feel true, and they are very intriguing pieces which you really want to like.
Right.
Yeah, got it. And is there any book which you like rereading?
So I would just, rather than naming a specific book in terms of things I return to, I would just say poetry as a genre can be very every month, just setting aside time, just a day, just to read poetry and not do anything else. That is a very good for the soul, I think, because it makes you focus on language. It makes you kind of slow down on, it feels very cleansing, I suppose. For some reason I can't fully explain, but I try to do that. Preferably in a bathtub. I find reading in a bathtub is good for blocking out all the interfering signals of the world.
Your therapeutic activity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So and I try to read also, especially in translation. I have a number of poets that I return to in translation. The Polish poet Zbigniew Herbert, who wrote a lot about the Holocaust, but from not directly. Like he has poems about being, again, like bearing witness to what cannot be described in language, things that are so horrifying. So instead of trying to depict it, he describes it through the perspective of a stone. That's his poetry is about the Holocaust, but in the perspective of a stone. So that kind of, I guess, poetry makes you see something very that you take for granted in your life, just in a different way. It forces you to do that, and that's why it's really necessary for me.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rebecca. I think this was one of the best conversations I had. And when I saw your profile, I was already very enchanted and was eager to talk to you. I think you are doing a great job and you are contributing some good stuff to this world, which is very meaningful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure talking to you. Bye.
Goodbye.